By the time a child reaches the age of 16 or so, we often trust them to be able to handle themselves. We often feel that they're ready to drive cars, wander around the mall, or even take on summer jobs. Most of the time, these are reasonable assumptions. Unfortunately, predators are all too ready to take advantage of individuals who are still, at the end of the day, defenseless. They can strike in an instant, leaving a void behind that can't be filled. On June 27, 2000, a girl of 16 was kidnapped from her summer job. What happened next was both horrifying and heartbreaking. To this day, police don't know which predator struck. They have a rogues gallery of snakes and suspects to choose from, but all the evidence is circumstantial. See these fiends for yourself by joining me in the odd mystery story of the murder and kidnapping of Molly Bish. Molly lived in Warren, Massachusetts with her mother Maggie Bish and her sister Heather Bish. She was bright, beautiful, and blonde, with her whole life ahead of her. The summer she disappeared, she had a lifeguard job at Comins Pond. She had just earned that job because her brother John Bish Jr. was her inspiration to become a lifeguard and an athlete. Her mother and sister remained devoted to finding her killer to this day. Heather Bish, in particular, has been very active in pushing the investigation forward and in advocating for changes to the laws which might make it easier to solve her sister's case. Like so many children and teens who get abducted by sexual predators, there was nothing about Molly or her life which would ever have suggested that she was about to become a victim of a major crime. Here is the timeline of the morning Molly disappeared. The detail shows that at 9:50 a.m. on June 27th, Molly and her mother Maggie walked into a nearby convenience store. The store camera captured the last image of Molly. They checked in at the Warren Police Department 6 minutes later to pick up her radio. Then, at 9:58 a.m., they arrived at Comins Pond. Molly set up her chair, but by 10:03 she was gone. Her shoes were still on the beach, her lifeguard kit was open, and in just 6 minutes, Molly was gone. The kidnapper was probably already on the scene. Maggie might have even seen him. As Molly got out of the car, Maggie saw a man in a white Chrysler. He was swarthy and unpleasant looking. She gave her dead-eye stare instead of a wave as he smoked his cigarette. He had a thick mustache, a round face, and thinning hair. He didn't look friendly, but neither did she assume he was a criminal. Still, he creeped her out enough so that she was able to remember him clearly. Later, she would help the police develop a detailed composite sketch. One notable characteristic Maggie mentioned was that he held his cigarette like a woman. We'll call him Cigarette Guy. At around 1 p.m. that same day, Maggie received a call from the police. They said there was no lifeguard on duty at Comins Pond, but that Molly's flip-flops and lifeguard kit were still there. Inexplicably, the lifeguard medical kit was open. Perhaps Molly's kidnapper approached her indicating he had some sort of injury and that he needed her to see it, only to take her by surprise. The crime scene became a mess. At first, the police assumed that Molly had drowned. They trampled all over the beach and didn't exercise the same sort of care they might have exercised had they have known that they were dealing with a kidnapping. A subsequent search dog took them down a gravel trail that connected to a nearby cemetery with the swimming area, but the search dog indicated that the trail ended there. When they couldn't find Molly's body in the pond, they launched one of the most extensive searches in Massachusetts history. They even turned up a witness, a man who said he'd seen the same white Chrysler and Cigarette Guy himself parked at a nearby cemetery parking lot that was connected to the pond by the short gravel path. Unfortunately, it would take 3 years, and then on June 9, 2003, before someone found her blue bathing suit, and then later her body, in a heavily wooded area of Palmer known as Whiskey Hill. Her remains had been dumped a few miles from the pond and just 5 miles from her family home. The police never released an official cause of death, but it was clear that the death was a homicide. And since the last thing that she'd been wearing was the blue bathing suit that was no longer on her body when the police found her, the predations that she suffered seemed fairly obvious and straightforward. The police scrambled to put together a suspect list. Police initially developed a list of 4 persons of interest. They were able to quickly rule one of them out. The remaining 3 seemed like strong contenders. Only one of the remaining 3 men continues to this day to be considered the prime suspect, in this case by the police. One of the persons of interest was Gerald Battistoni. He was a convicted child rapist from Ware. He was a suspect in a second child murder committed just 6 years prior. That was the Holly Pieranen murder, another unsolved case. It was a case that Molly herself was familiar with, as it was just 6 years prior to her own kidnapping and murder, and she had written to Holly's family a letter of consolation. Both Holly and Molly had blonde hair and similar features. So did the young blonde girl that Battistoni was convicted of raping. Battistoni lived close to Comins Pond. He also apparently attempted suicide in 2011, after seeing news reports about the investigators' work just several months after he was ultimately convicted of the first child rape. Police never named Battistoni as an official suspect, which means they don't have enough evidence between this and a circumstantial set of facts. Circumstantial evidence is often enough to convince true crime buffs, but oftentimes it doesn't stand up when it's time to convict someone in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. Besides, there's also Rodney Stanger. He was convicted of the fatal stabbing of his girlfriend. He lived in Southbridge, right around the time Molly was abducted. He liked to fish at Comins Pond. Stanger also drove a white car and was a good fit for the composite sketch. He took off for Florida just a year after Molly disappeared. His links to the crime scene weaker than Battistoni's links, but his name continues to come up when police talk about this crime. And what about the official prime suspect? Well, that would be Francis Sumner Sr., a convicted rapist who died in 2016. He used to live in Spencer. He looked eerily like Maggie's description of cigarette guy. He also operated body shops, so he would have easy access to a white car that he didn't necessarily own, and that he wouldn't have needed to steal a car to do so. He was well known to have driven his customers' cars around. Sumner got convicted of aggravated rape and kidnapping in 1982. He had locked a woman he'd hire to clean an apartment in the apartment with him. He then choked her and threatened to kill her before raping her. He was also involved in numerous other civil and criminal lawsuits during his lifetime. He had a known violent streak. So why isn't this case closed? Well, police have been unable to link him to the crime with DNA. The police have a lot of DNA to work with from Molly's swimsuit, her belongings, from her body, and from the medical kit. They even took DNA from Sumner's son, who himself is serving in federal prison, but it was no match, or at least no match that today's technology is capable of providing. Francis Sumner wasn't even officially named a suspect until 2021. Nevertheless, advancements in DNA testing could finally link him, or another one of the suspects, to this crime. Do you think police will ever find the link? Or do you think that they should be taking a closer look at one of the other suspects? The Molly Bish investigation is still open, and investigators are still working the case. They're asking for any information the public may have about Francis Sumner's employment practices, including personnel he worked with, associates he spent time with, vehicles he had access to, travel he'd undertaken, and any of his known habits. The police also continue to hope for new advancements in technology. A significant number of the items they still have in evidence may be tested or retested. They often retest every time a new advancement arises. Heather Bish is campaigning for even more intensive testing. She wants police to use familial DNA. Familial DNA raises privacy concerns as it is separate from genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy casts a wide net. Familial DNA is a limited inquiry for those close relatives. One close relative's DNA has already failed to nail Sumner to the wall, but other searches may bear fruit. Perhaps someday deeper DNA testing will help. In more recent quotes from Heather Bish, she said, "We've had a number of persons of interest over the years and a number of analyses performed. I've really had to become my own DNA expert and try to understand the complicated tests." Heather Bish said, "I've tried so many things over the years. I've taken out ads in newspapers, consulted with experts. I've had the opportunity to work on a task force with the governor, but we have yet to uncover this person, the person who did this to Molly. I know it's not my responsibility, but as the family of a victim, you feel it's your job to do so." The Bish family has advocated fiercely over the last 2 decades for proper training for the police involved in similar cases, especially on how officials respond to the report of a missing person. She said, "Look at the Karen Reed trial. Whether you believe she's guilty or not, it's clear the investigation done by the police was not done correctly." She said, adding, she couldn't believe blood from the crime scene was collected in solo cups. "It's become disheartening over the years," she said. "From my perspective, all I have left is my own voice. I can't make the district attorney consult with the experts that I've been able to and fortunate enough to consult with. Our state police detectives continue to work with the crime lab to assess evidence that can be reanalyzed thanks to the changes in science, including DNA testing," local county DNA Early's office said. "I feel strongly and hope for the future that science will bring this person to light and for us and the state police to utilize the technology and DNA testing," said Bish. Bish added, "The clothing Molly was last seen wearing included a red plaid patterned boxing shorts and an off-white ribbed tank top. Those have never been recovered. If you have helpful information about this case, contact the Worcester County Sheriff's Office. If you want to share your thoughts about this story, please let me know in the comments below." Thank you for listening to this story. My name is Vince. It's such a sad story of what happened to Molly Bish and how her sister Heather still, all these years later, is trying to solve this puzzle to get the person responsible taken to justice. Our thoughts are with you, Heather, and we hope that this comes to fruition soon. If you like this story, you may also enjoy the story of the Short family where Jennifer was taken and wasn't until many, many months later that she was found murdered. Up there in the right-hand corner of your screen, click on the box that says The Short Family. Thank you.